Hi, everyone. Um, I want to start this talk by asking a question that I've had to ask myself many, many times, which is, what is a newspaper game? And I guess part of that, why should you care? Now, I'm sure that a newspaper game is a thing, because when I say newspaper game, you can imagine one. And if I showed you a game and said, would this make a good newspaper game? I imagine you could give me an answer, which means the idea exists somewhere in the ether. So, what is it? Can we define it? And I think we can attack this from sort of two directions. There's a historical one. What are the games that traditionally have been published in newspapers? And then, of course, there's a design one. What kind of design decisions or mechanics make something a newspaper game? So, we're going to start with the historical. On the left is the word cross, published in the New York World newspaper on December 12th, 1913. As far as we know, this is the first crossword ever published in a newspaper. This format of puzzle did exist before. It was called Double Diamond, and it did appear in some puzzle books. Um, Now, it goes without saying that the word square is the sort of ludic predecessor of all of these, and that is of ancient origin. There's one from the Roman Empire. But this puzzle itself really got formalized in the early 1900s. You can see another early example from, hey, look, the Boston Globe in 1917. Now, at some point, someone swapped the names. We don't know why. And then reportedly, an illustrator accidentally dropped the hyphen, giving us the name crossword. Um, by the 1920s, crossword mania was sweeping the nation. I found this great headline and editorial cartoon showing a distraught husband who is being neglected by his puzzle obsessed wife. Now, interestingly, the New York Times, perhaps currently the most iconic publisher of crosswords, didn't publish a crossword until 1942. In fact, before that, they had derided the practice as below a newspaper. And even then, they didn't start publishing a daily crossword until the 1950s. Now, this is a bit of a tangent, but chess is another game that is intertwined with newspapers. This column from the Lancet, a medical journal, was published on December 28th in 1823, which means that for over 200 years, chess games, chess puzzles, chess recaps, chess gossip have been in newspapers. In fact, there are entire chess newspapers that date back to the 1800s, which means that if you've ever watched like a Gotham chess TikTok, you are participating in a legacy of games journalism that dates back to before the electric light bulb. Now, I'm not a historian, obviously, but I do think an argument can be made that the game of chess, its popularity, its size couldn't be possible without the newspaper. One last piece of puzzle archaeology also is the Sudoku. So, the magic square as a basic number puzzle we think dates back to somewhere around 200 BCE. There's an example from China. It's been suggested that the game that would become Sudoku started as this number puzzle in a French daily newspaper. The layout is the same, but the rules are a little different, so it's unclear if it actually is a predecessor. Now, the game itself was formalized in the 1970s by a professor named Howard Garnes, or sorry, an architect named Howard Garnes, but it proved to be a lot more popular in Japan, actually. And it was in Japan that it got its name, the long form of which is, and I apologize for my pronunciation, Sujiwa Dokushin Nikagiru, which either translates to the digits must be single or we like numbers to be celibate, depending on how you interpret those words. That, of course, was shortened to Sudoku. Um, Now, it was popular in Japan in the 70s and the 80s, and then it was sort of rediscovered in America and has been a worldwide phenomena ever since. So that's all ancient history. If we want to look at what's being published in newspapers now, we really need to think about digital puzzles. The crossword effectively went online in 1993 when both the New York Times and the LA Times put their crosswords on this sort of fledgling internet thing. And in the years that followed, other papers did the same, and other games like Sudoku and Ken soon followed. I think it's probably fair to suggest that the New York Times is really the vanguard of this like newspaper digital puzzle revolution, and that service took on its recognizable form sort of in 2018 when we got Spelling Bee, their first like digital native game. Soon after that, you got Letterboxd, you got Tiles, a favorite of mine, and then Vertex, which sadly has been canceled. And then, of course, I think the real thing that kicked this all into high gear was the pandemic. Digital games, daily games exploded in popularity, none more iconic or impactful than Wordle, which absolutely dominated Twitter in 2021. I'm sure you all remember. Uh, the Times would then go on to acquire Wordle for an undisclosed sum, rumored to be in the low seven figures, which I'm going to name drop here. I'm kind of a friend of the guy who designed Wordle, and it has been disclosed to me, and it is a lot of money. I'm not going to say how much. But this is when the arms race like really kicked off. The next year in 2023, you saw Hearst Magazine acquire Puzzmo by Zach Gage and Ornithorox. You also saw the Washington Post, the second largest general interest newspaper in the country, launch their suite of both classic and original games. In 2024, we saw platform launches from, hey, Boston Globe, Apple News, The New Yorker, Vulture Magazine, and even non-news platforms like LinkedIn. This year, 2025, amongst a million others, we've seen Slate launch games, TED of TED Talks, The Atlantic, and even Bloomberg, like financial news. And I should point out, I'm not being comprehensive here. Essentially, every paper in the country has launched a digital games platform. These are just the ones that I sort of wanted to highlight and found some fun imagery for. But this has become an industry. The fact that every little paper can do this is because there are now entire services built around white labeling games for smaller papers. Now I'm going to pause here because I haven't introduced myself. I'm Dan. I'm the director of Globe Games at the Boston Globe. And before this, I was a health and serious games designer. I was a gamification consultant, and I was briefly a board game designer. And I think, like a lot of people in and around the games industry, I was vaguely aware that newspapers had puzzles and took them seriously, and there was maybe some money in it. But I genuinely did not understand to what extent. When I took this job, I really had to learn a lot. And this talk is essentially just a brain dump of everything that I've learned and absorbed in that time. Essentially, this is the the YouTube video I wish I could have looked up before I interviewed for this job. But let's get back to our question. What is a newspaper game? We've covered what has been a newspaper game. We've done it from sort of a, I think that's inductive perspective. Let's go the other way. Can we come up with a definition based on the design decisions of a game to define a newspaper game? I think we can, and this is my best attempt at the moment to do that. A newspaper game is a puzzle game with daily content that looks like it could be played on paper. And I really want to emphasize something. Looks like. This is doing most of the work in this definition. Now, I sort of came to this conclusion essentially via osmosis, just from being part of this space. But when I sat down to write this talk, I was like, I should be a little bit more scientific about this. So I went out and scoured major services to find a big list of original games. I stopped counting at 44. There are, of course, many, many, many more. Once I had this list, I then used a completely, I'm sure, biased and subjective rubric to rate them on a scale 1 through 10, based on the question, how much is this a video game? I'm going to break down this scale for you. If a game scores a 1 or a 2, it is unambiguously a pen and paper game. The crossword, Sudoku, Ken. I'd also include games like Tango or Queens on LinkedIn, games that fundamentally could be just printed out and played. Now, yes, these games are now digital, which allows for things like hints or things like answer validation, but fundamentally that does not change the character of the game. Now, a 3 or a 4 is a game that is probably like a digital native, was made digitally first, but could probably just be printed and played. So I think Typeshift on Puzzmo is a really excellent example of this, as is Spelling Bee on the New York Times. Now, the reason they don't score a 1 or a 2 is because they contain some kind of element that I do think would kind of make it a little less fun to play on paper. For Typeshift, that's the kind of slidey up and down interface. It's a big part of the joy of playing. And for Spelling Bee, honestly, it's the scoring mechanism. It would just be really annoying to play Spelling Bee and be like, how many letters is this? +5. Okay, now I'm at 14. Oh, I'm a queen bee or whatever. But fundamentally, these are also pen and paper games. At 5 and 6, I think we diverge from pen and paper games. This is something that has a digital component that I really think can't be removed without changing it, but it could probably be replicated by making it maybe a 2-player analog game. So something like Pinpoint on LinkedIn, you would need someone to reveal the further clues to you. They could read it from a book. It would still be very analog, but it wouldn't quite be the same. And I think for connections, yeah, you could lay out a connections grid on a piece of paper, but the answer validation is so central to the fun of connections that I'm putting it up in 6. Now, 7 and 8 is where we get unambiguously digital. Something like Wordle or Align, the new game on the Boston Globe, they maybe could be adapted to analog, but it would take a lot of work. And by way of example, we have recently tried to adapt Align to an analog format, and we had to change it so much that it is like fundamentally a different game. It's sort of like a tribute to Align, not really like playing Align. And I put Wordle in here also, and this will come up again, because Wordle requires like an intelligent agent to play with you. Wordle, I think, as we all are aware, is essentially Mastermind, which is an analog game, but requires another person to act as the computer. 9 and 10 is, hey, this is just a video game. There aren't a ton of examples of this. I think I clocked like 5 in my search, but they're pretty obvious to me. So Ridges on the Washington Post is a timed game. It has like an infinite scroll of letters. It's got lots of flashy animations. It's unambiguously a video game. And then Spell Tower on Puzzmo, I mean, that's got gravity and like box destruction. I really just don't think you could turn these games analog, even if you made them into board games or had another person playing. Like the character is fundamentally digital. They are video games. So we've reached the top of the scale. We've gone through all these games. And I think it's interesting to point out that at no point have we left the aesthetic world of pen and paper games. Even my 7s, 8s, 9s, and 10s are still fundamentally letters in boxes. Visually, they do just look like printed games. They might have flourishes, they might have animations and movement, but the aesthetics of pen and paper are there. I didn't come to any game in this search that I didn't think looked like it could be printed out, even though I would contend that everything above a 5 can't be printed out. Now, there is a fun side effect of doing this, is that I can make this graph. So this is a graph showing every major sort of game release online, going back to 1993 with the crossword, and rated by their 1 through 10 scale, going from green to red. And I think there are 2 patterns that are worth pointing out. The first is obvious. Hey, there's a lot more games being made right now. The second one is, boy, a lot of those games are digital native or just kind of straight up video games every year. Which brings me to the second half of the big question. What is a newspaper game, and why should you, watching, presumably a puzzle or game designer, care about this? First, I can tell you that this acceleration in games is not a coincidence, and it's not a gamble that these organizations are taking. Games are proving themselves pretty objectively to be powerful drivers of subscription, retention, engagement. Now, I only have access to stats and analytics from the Globe, but just here at the Globe, in the last 18 months that we've been running this games platform, we have seen a market effect on player behavior. To take a step back and give some context, the newspaper industry, the Boston Globe, and a lot of other industries use a metric called churn, which just describes a user's propensity to drop off or to cancel. One of the strongest predictors of having low churn is frequency of visits. So, someone who visits a paper 7 days a week is a lot less likely to cancel their subscription than someone who visits once. Obviously, having a daily game, that's a good incentive for people to come more often. But it actually goes beyond that. We've noticed that even users who engage with games, let's say 4 days a week, they actually have a lower churn rate as a group than users who visit the Globe 4 days a week but don't play games. It seems that beyond just visiting more often, engaging with games also makes you a more loyal and dependable subscriber. And this is a huge deal. It's a big deal for me and my work. It's a big deal for the Globe. And I don't think I'm overstepping to suggest that other organizations are probably seeing this effect too, which means they are investing money in it, and they are importantly hiring people like me and potentially like you to oversee this new important part of their business. The other thing that's happening is that these organizations, they want unique content, but they probably don't have the resources or the risk tolerance to just create and test and build games internally. So you're seeing more and more acquisitions in this space. Wordle is obviously a very famous one, but The Atlantic has a game called Bracket City that they acquired. Align was not a game I invented. We acquired it from its designer. And Circuits actually was an acquisition made by Puzzmo of a game that I'm pretty sure they found on Reddit. Somebody had just posted. Now, all of these games, at one point or another, were just something that a hobbyist or an indie developer had made, and now they are on these big platforms. So, I guess ultimately what I'm trying to say is you are here, right? You should be paying attention to this space, to the newspaper games industry. There have always been puzzles in newspapers, and I don't imagine they'll ever go away. Now, of course, I'm not a clairvoyant. I cannot tell you what's going to happen in the future, but I'd be pretty surprised if this industry takes its foot off the gas in the next couple of years, which means I think there will continue to be really interesting and great opportunities for puzzle people in this space. And I think you should at least be paying attention, if not actively trying to get involved. Um, so yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Amazing talk. Thank you. And also, it's worth mentioning that last year we did also have a talk from the New York Times. So you combine all this knowledge together into incredible knowledge about newspaper games.
Yeah.
So we did have a bunch of questions that came up in the chat. So here we go. Just another one's just come through. So first off, from Feverish in the chat, would you say the modern landscape for newspaper puzzles is better than it used to be? I guess better is a tricky word to define. And then there's a follow-up to that, sorry, which is, if it is, do you think it's being driven by computers and the internet, or is there some other reason?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on where you want to go into the path. I think it's certainly better than 1823. Yeah, I think it gets better every year. I think I just doing that exercise of trying to go look at games and to like index for my little graph, I was shocked. There were some games I'd never seen. I didn't know Bloomberg had games, and then I looked at them and they're like really interesting. Like somebody really had a fun time making puzzles for Bloomberg. Somebody had a great time making puzzles for LinkedIn. And yeah, I think it's absolutely getting better and better. Like I said, I don't think this is going to decelerate anytime soon. So
Mhm.
yeah, I imagine that graph will be huge in 2026 and 2027.
So actually, on that note, I'm going to skip a question, but I'll come back to the one before it. Ariane was asking, does the newspaper game space show any signs of slowing down after the spectacular growth in numbers over the past 3 years? And I guess maybe it's connected to what you're saying, because you're talking about the number of games that are being made. What about
Yeah,
in terms of audience?
I don't. So that's a little beyond my scope. I mean, I'm not going to slow down next year. And if you look at like again, I think the biggest players in the space right now, I would estimate are probably the Times, Puzzmo, and LinkedIn. And if you just look at those three services, the Times went from making one new game every 3 years to making three games a year this year. Puzzmo launched with like a bunch of games, like eight, and then made two the following year, and then three the next one. Actually, it might be like four or five. I might have my count wrong. Um, at the moment, evidence suggests that there is a desire to make more games per year, and I can tell you again, I only have the perspective of the Boston Globe, but I'm starting to see a little bit of evidence of like game fatigue, essentially, but not to games as a whole, but to individual games. It's sort of like how Netflix needs to have a new movie every month, or else you might cancel Netflix. I'm seeing that people are like eventually tiring of Sudoku, but I introduced Ken, and now a bunch of those people started playing Ken. And people will eventually tire of the mini crossword, but we introduced a line, and now a ton of mini crossword players are playing a line. So yeah, I think actually the pace is probably going to increase a little going forward.
It seems like with all the investment being put into those games, it seems
Yeah.
like the businesses see a lot of potential there as well. So,
Yeah, and it is a relative I mean, that's not true. It's not strictly true. It is a relatively low cost way of engaging
mm,
subscribers.
sure.
A daily game, one puzzle does cost less than the 9 or 10 articles you have to,
Mhm.
publish every day. And I don't know enough about newspapers. Maybe it's 100 articles, but yeah.
I suppose that also depends on the puzzle. I think Wordle is probably the cheapest thing to run because you basically just need a
Yeah.
random word every day,
Yeah,
right?
and I will say you are seeing slightly more algorithmic games. Ridges on the Washington Post is a
Mhm.
great example. Like nobody has to make those puzzles.
Sure. Yeah.
Crossword is the king of like the made puzzle, but you are seeing
Handcrafted.
more algorithmic
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. And then even within Sudoku, there you can get randomly generated ones, but then you can
Yeah.
also get ones that are handcrafted, and some
Yeah.
people have a
And same
preference
thing with
there.
like Ken. You can
Yeah.
get an algorithmic Ken, or you can get a bespoke Ken.
Mhm.
I think there's certainly space for both.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so a question from Ampersand here. Newspaper games feel so simple to come up with, but at this point, do you think we've run out of those surprisingly simple ideas to make little
No.
games out of?
Nope. No.
No.
No. No. And I'll tell you why. Because there are a trillion folk games, right? So even if you didn't want to come up with an idea, there are uncountable numbers of word and number games that have been played, since before widespread literacy. Like it wouldn't be hard to just grab one and digitize it. The other thing is I think because of the trend to moving into digital and the video game space, there's actually a ton of untapped potential. Like before Ridges, there was not a single time-intensive newspaper game in the space. There wasn't a game that you could lose by running out of time, and now there's Ridges, which means that one little change, you could apply that to a million folk games and make 30, 40 new newspaper games with just that one change, adding physics, adding better animations. Like moving into the video game space means we are going to merge, I think, more with that space. And there's a lot more ideas there than just where can we put letters in boxes.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Anastasia from Inkwell Games, who did a talk yesterday.
Yes.
It's another platform. It's got a couple of games on there. They do daily puzzles
Yeah.
as well. The question is, do you have any data/insights on wordy newspaper games versus non-wordy ones? And I've also been wondering about this myself.
Um, Again, I only have the data from the 6 games we have.
Sure.
Uh, at the moment, the mini crossword so dwarfs everything else that I have to remove it from graphs. because it
Right.
makes the
An
other
outlier.
lines, yeah, it makes the other lines unreadable.
Mhm.
Nothing's touching the mini crossword. If you remove the mini crossword from the equation, my experience suggests that word games are still king of the heap. All of our word games are more popular than all of our other games. But honestly, I would be curious to hear. I would also love to know this answer from maybe someone who works at Puzzmo or the New York Times who has a slightly greater variety of genres. Because for all I know, Tiles is crushing it right now. I don't know.
Mhm.
There's no way to know.
Right. Do you have any instincts about why it might be that word games
So,
might be better?
uh, uh, I this is I'm not, I would say making this up. My educated guess is that word games meet people's expectations for what a newspaper game is. And I think for someone like me, I'm 36, maybe. Yeah, I'm within a year of 36. I'm not 100% sure. Um, I've grown up with video games, so my expectations are pretty broad. I could play anything, but I think a lot of the audience for a lot of these newspapers is in their 50s and 60s and sometimes 70s. Um, and sometimes when they see something that isn't a word game or isn't Sudoku, they kind of balk. So you're seeing all their numbers pushed into the mini crossword, and maybe they're not willing to try, tiles, right? But that will change, right? The generation that was raised on video games will age up and will engage with these things, and they will bring their own expectations.
Great. Excellent answer. Thank you. I think I have time for one more question. So apologies to more questions came through than we got time for. We'll send them all to Discord so they can ask you there. But the final question I'll ask today is from Waika, which is, Wordle seems to be the extreme case, but do you think game makers whose games are picked up by papers are rewarded appropriately? Yeah. So what's your perception of that, like when they're acquired?
I don't know. I mean, I've only been privy to two acquisitions. The Wordle one, I think he was appropriately rewarded, obviously. I think when we purchased a line, we negotiated an agreement. And we purchased a line from Brendan Emmett Quigley, who's a notable crossword constructor, and his design partner, Ben Gottlieb. And part of our agreement with them is that also they're still part of any further licensing we do, which I don't think was part of the Wordle agreement. I think Wordle was one and done. Um, I have no idea how anyone else is handling this. I hope people are being fairly compensated. I do think part of what could help is like if you were to make a game and sell it, if you stay attached as the content provider, that also provides some sort of ongoing, compensation. Brendan still makes every Align puzzle. It's not he didn't just sell it to us and then I haven't talked to him since. I mean, he called me today.
Right.
He's still involved.
Mhm.
But I have no idea. I do think though that if we see more acquisitions and there's a bit of an arms race, I think it'll be like a seller's market. Like there's a lot of desire for it, and not every little game is a hit, and not everything fits the genre each paper is looking for. So, I mean, I can tell you right now, I risk my inbox here, but like if you have a game that is about the meaning of words, not the spelling of words, that you want to show me, I want to see it.
Oh,
I'm
there we go.
very interested in that, right? That's a niche that I'm really curious about, and I think there's a need for it at the Globe. So yeah, I think hopefully it'll be a seller's market. Certainly, any games that I acquire, I will do my absolute best to compensate people as well as I can.
Suddenly, everybody in chat has just rushed off to go and create a
Yeah, I
game
mean
to send to you.
that's fair. I don't get that many emails. I can cope.
Great, thank you. That is all the time we have for questions. If you have
Yeah.
any more, please head over to the Discord at thinkygames.com/discord if you're not there already. And I might not have made the thread yet, but I'll make a thread and Daniel will be there to.
And you know what? After I hang up, I'm going to join the Discord because I don't have a so I'm going to do that, and then I'll
That's
be in
important.
there.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Yes.
Great, thank you, Daniel. And we'll get set up for the next talk now. All right, thanks.
Thanks.